So I was given a very valuable piece of advice whilst preparing for you today. Pick a topic and go into it deeply. Don't try to please everybody. So, of course, I'm going to talk to you about how to change the world and make it happier. Rebellion is part of my story. It's a tall order, right? Believe me, I'm feeling the pressure. But if in 10 minutes you all feel compelled to go and practice what I'm talking about, then I've potentially impacted the lives of 184 people just in this room. Who knows the lives that 184 of you will go on to impact upon? Now, I know what you're thinking. Why 184? Why not the 460 of us? Well, because research tells us that broadly 40% of us struggle to experience and express our emotions in a way that others can support us with. 40% of us could be more emotionally, socially, and economically connected. 40% of us are living stories that become prophecies. They influence how we experience the world, and that's a problem. Why? Because stories that become prophecies become legacies. They are what we tell our children, even without speaking, and what our children come to live. And our children, all of our children, not just our own, have enough to deal with. The Nuffield report that between 1980 and 2000, the rates of depression in 15 to 16-year-olds nearly doubled. Young minds tell us that hospitalisation for self-harm increased 68% just in the last decade. And UNICEF report that children living in the UK have lower levels of well-being than over half of the 29 wealthiest countries. So why are our children suffering more? Our modern lives have become preoccupied with progress and perfection, and progress brings great things. But could the increased stress of technology, productivity, and efficiency be causing our children to suffer from a loss of connection? For me, the answer is yes. And when our children suffer a loss of connection with us, they continue to experience a loss of connection with others. One of the most robust findings in developmental psychology is that the way we relate to one another, what psychologists would call an attachment style, is handed down from generation to generation quite unconsciously. Our children live the story that we live. Let me explain why. I want to use an expression I was told. We rely on what we receive. And about 40% of us here had parents who found it difficult to hear and respond sensitively to our distress when we were babies, because they themselves struggle to understand and express their own distress. It's hard to hear from another person what we struggle to hear in ourselves. Now, if we grow up feeling like we can't rely on others, two very important things happen. We lose a sense of trust in the world and the people in it. We also lose our ability to tolerate negative emotion because we can't seem to communicate it in a way that others can hear. Trust is fundamental to our capacity to be curious, to reflect on the world and our experiences in different perspectives with wide possibilities. Without trust, we struggle to tolerate uncertainty. We prefer black and white. We don't like grey. So the experiences that we do have become thought of in limited ways, either good or bad, but rarely both. But if we only have limited ways of experiencing the world, we only have limited ways to interpret, to cope, to empathise. So how do we change? Well, in her research on attachment theory, Mary Main found that when she asked adults about their childhoods, the 60% who had secure, resilient relationships with their parents talked about their lives in coherent ways. Their stories were full of detailed memories. They knew that life wasn't all plain sailing, but neither was it all terrible either. Quite significantly, Main found that it wasn't what happened in these adults' childhoods that mattered. It was the value that they had in the meaning that they made from their experiences that really made the difference. Storying our lives gives us the opportunity to remember, explore, and understand the meaning of our experiences on who we have become today. Reflecting on our experiences and paying attention to them in different ways can literally help us to create new connections in our brain, new possibilities of experience, and a new story to pass on to our children. A better understanding of our own experiences also helps us to have a better understanding of other people's experiences. We develop empathy, and empathy helps us to connect better, gives us compassion, and with that we can build communities. And this is when we really start to change the world for our children. Now, I realise I've given you so much information in 5 minutes, But I need to turn the page, and I want you to take with you 4 main points. 1, the story that you tell yourself about life will influence how you experience the world and the people in it. 2, the story that you tell yourself about life will influence how your children experience the world and the people in it. Number 3, our children are facing ever-increasing challenges to their communication and connection, and we have a duty and a responsibility to support their resilience. And number 4, it starts with us. Now, I wanted to put this into context for you, show you the impact of looking at events from a different perspective and shifting the life story. I want to tell you my own story. I lived a very negative story up until the age of 18. A rebellious teenager, I warned you. I did everything I could think of and more to anger my parents. I would be grounded again, and then grounded indefinitely. I met all of my milestones without permission. You see, I was the youngest of 3 children. My brother and sister were 4.5 and 6 years older than me. I was too young to have an opinion and too young to help. My parents worked every waking moment to put us through a private education that they believed would be the gateway to our success. My father was a city financier. He worked long hours in a stressful corporate world. He would leave the house before we were awake and return when we were asleep. My mother would work 9 to 5, run the house, cook, clean, and generally manage all of the other tasks that are involved in raising a family. She was withdrawn, resentful, and disengaged, exhausted. They both were. The only way they found to cope was to have strict control over their lives, and it felt ours too. I responded to it at the time by rebelling against the control, by creating enough havoc to try and engage my parents' attention, because, after all, having angry parents is better than having parents who simply aren't emotionally engaged. As I grew up, I loved but couldn't trust. I took risks with my safety without regard or care for myself. Life was a mess. I suffered with anorexia and depression through my GCSEs and A-levels. At 18, I went to university, 5 hours away from home. Not a coincidence. I swore to start again, to meet like-minded friends and enjoy my newfound freedom. On day 2, I met a boy. Shortly after, I was pregnant. You see, these relationships unfold quite unconsciously. I lived a certain story. I learnt one thing very fast. I wasn't going to give up on my baby, and neither was I going to give up on university. Young, naive, and no stranger to risk, I thought I had enough determination to see it through. When my parents and the university told me it couldn't be done, well, the rebellious teenager inside me shook her head, gave a snarky expression, and mouthed, "Watch me." By the time my son was born, I felt like the 2 of us had already fought and won most of the battles. We were a team. My story became one of determination, of triumph, and of teamwork. What I know now is that had I not developed that rebellious and risky streak, because of that early sense of restriction, I wouldn't be standing on this stage in front of you today. Now, obviously, I'm cutting things short, and of course, life hasn't been straightforward. But as I found my way through challenges, I became more confident, more resilient. In dark times, my story comforted me that although I felt sad, I knew there would be a time I got through it again. I don't give up. Another thing happened when my story changed. I started to remember the more positive times in my childhood. Like when I needed something, my dad would literally build it. I mean, who does that now? And IKEA doesn't count. My first desk, my rabbit hutch and run. He taught me to ski on Christmas Day morning when I was 16, when the snow sparkled in the sunlight and there was no one around. I remember the summers at our caravan on Hayling Island when my brother and I would see whether we could walk from one side of the creek to the other without getting our wellies completely stuck in the mud. And then every Thursday evening, my mum would take us to the fun fair. She would hold our coats and watch us on the rides, whilst enjoying a bag of those freshly made hot donuts. The smell of them still reminds me now. Without looking at my story again, there's a chance I could have forgotten to give the good times just as much space in my memory. My parents, by the way, became my rock when I had my son. After the first couple of years, they retired from work, and my mum would travel the 5 hours every other weekend to come and stay and support me. She would cook and leave meals in my freezer, listen to me drone on about deadlines, and generally make life feel easier. My parents became, and still are, hugely important in my children's lives. The first part of my story is no longer all about anger, disengagement, and control. It's more about how my parents sacrificed their own freedom to try and safeguard our future. Because of this, I think I look at the world differently, in many colours rather than just black and white. I see opportunity within the challenge rather than the challenge in opportunity, just by rewriting the story. So now it's your turn. Discovering your own story and living the strengths that you've developed could help to change your life and the lives you will eventually leave behind. So number 1, write your own story. Literally create your life in chapters. They can be as long or as short as you like, but what they share is that they represent a time in your life that came to a close when something changed, for better or worse. Question what it is that you learned from life in that chapter and how you've carried it forward. Fundamentally, understand what it is that your experiences have meant to who you are now. Between each chapter, recognize the strength that you've developed to face the future, because through it all you have survived, even if you feel like you're yet to thrive. If when you look back yours feels full of problems and negativity, really question, where is your funfair? If yours is short without many memories, spend some time going over family photographs, asking family stories. Really question how it was that you felt and where that feeling came from. By the end, you should have a sense of what's become important to you over the years and how your experience have influenced who you are and how you have survived. A good story recognizes that there is both good and bad in everything. Number 2, find someone to tell it to. This is so important. If these new ways of thinking are to become automatic, they need to be practiced. Friends come in different guises, some of whom you see on the school gate and have the occasional coffee with, some you play tennis with, friends who you see at large events and talk about the job or the children with, and then there are the friends who really know you. Friends who you can call when things go badly and genuinely feel able to talk to. Friends who will listen and support you without judgment. Friends who will call you when they need someone. About 40% of us may be wondering whether we really have those relationships. Well, now is your opportunity. A good story will help you to feel more confident, more resilient, and help you to trust that when you need someone, they will be there for you. You just need to reach out. So what of my story now? Well, yesterday was my last day in the NHS. After 11 years of working with children and families in crisis, I decided I wanted to work with them at the beginning, the transition to parenthood. I wanted to turn all the 20 years of masses of research on attachment and life stories into the kind of preventative practice that we haven't managed to make mainstream yet, to prevent the prophecy becoming the legacy. Because I have to believe that the world I will eventually leave behind for our children will help them to have good relationships and meaningful experiences. I'm not sure how long it will take me, and neither am I sure how I will gather enough support along the way. But I know I have a rebellious teenager inside me who will just not give up. And with your support and connection, we might just succeed to change the future. Thank you.